Right now, in nearly every country on Earth, someone is telling a ghost story. Japan has yurei, Mexico has La Llorona, Scotland has ghostly castles with centuries of reported hauntings. Indigenous cultures across Africa, Asia, and the Americas all have their own spirits of the dead who linger, warn, or haunt the living. These cultures never spoke to each other, never shared myths directly, and yet somehow, they all arrived at the same basic idea, that death isn't necessarily the end, and something can be left behind. So why does nearly every human culture on the planet believe in ghosts? In some form or another. Let's start with the obvious explanation. Death is universal. Every human culture that has ever existed has had to deal with people dying, often suddenly, often without warning, and often without any real explanation for why. Before modern medicine, death surrounded people constantly. Children died young, diseases spread with no known cause. War and famine could wipe out entire families overnight. Grief was not a rare emotional experience. It was a near constant one. And grief, psychologists argue, doesn't simply disappear the moment someone dies. This is where ghost stories may actually begin doing something useful. Losing someone suddenly creates an enormous gap. A person who was there yesterday and is simply gone today. Believing that person might still exist somewhere, watching, lingering, or communicating in small ways, gives grieving people a psychological bridge between total loss and complete acceptance. Anthropologists studying grief across dozens of cultures have found that many mourning rituals worldwide specifically involve some form of continued connection with the dead, rather than a complete, immediate severing of the relationship. There's also a much simpler biological explanation layered underneath all of this. Human brains are exceptionally good at detecting patterns, sometimes too good. This tendency, known as pareidolia, is the same reason people see faces in clouds or hear voices in static noise. In low light, in unfamiliar houses, in creaking old buildings at night, human brains are primed to interpret ambiguous sounds and shadows as something alive, something watching. Evolutionarily, this makes sense. A brain that mistakes a shadow for a predator and runs away wastes a little energy. A brain that mistakes a real predator for nothing and doesn't react could die. Being overly cautious about potential threats, including imagined ones, was often the safer evolutionary bet. Sleep paralysis adds another layer entirely. This is a real, well-documented neurological phenomenon where a person's mind wakes up before their body does, leaving them fully conscious but completely unable to move, often accompanied by intense feelings of dread and, disturbingly often, the vivid sensation that someone or something is in the room with them. Cultures around the world have independently developed remarkably similar explanations for this exact experience, describing shadow figures, sitting demons, or spirits pressing down on a sleeper's chest, despite having no contact with each other whatsoever. Beyond biology and grief, ghost stories also serve a clear social function. Many hauntings in folklore aren't random. They're deliberately tied to specific moral lessons. A vengeful spirit who died unjustly, a ghost trapped because of an unfinished, guilty deed, a haunted house built on stolen or cursed land. These stories reinforce cultural values, warning listeners, particularly children, about the consequences of specific behaviors, using fear as a uniquely effective memory tool, because frightening stories tend to get remembered and repeated far more reliably than gentle, forgettable advice ever does. Ghost stories also help societies process collective trauma. Locations associated with tragedy, battlefields, prisons, hospitals, disaster sites, frequently develop ghost stories attached to them almost immediately afterward. This isn't necessarily about literal belief in spirits. It's a community's way of acknowledging that something terrible happened there, and that the emotional weight of it hasn't simply vanished along with the physical evidence. So here's the full picture. Ghost stories persist across every culture on Earth, not because of any single unified explanation, but because they solve several deeply human problems simultaneously. They soften the psychological blow of sudden loss. They exploit a brain wired to detect potential danger in ambiguous shadows. They explain a genuinely strange neurological sleep phenomenon nearly everyone eventually experiences. And they teach moral lessons far more effectively than plain advice ever could. The next time you hear a ghost story, whether it's an old family legend or an unexplained creak in your own house at night, remember that you're participating in something remarkably old and remarkably universal. The human attempt to make sense of death, memory, and the unexplainable things our own minds sometimes do to us in the dark.